we are live. So if you want to start, that.
Yeah, okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say that, ladies and gentlemen. So tonight our tech talk is on how air conditioning works. So what I'm going to try and do is to give you a basic concept. Something went wrong?
You're not standing view.
Yeah, that's all right.
Thing, eh?
Yeah, that's all right. It doesn't matter if I'm a little bit over here or there, because I will wander, you know. So how it works, and that is the important part, because then we're going to talk about fitting it to an S-Series Valiant. And if you don't know how the system works properly, you can't put the components in the right place to do the correct job. So let's have a look at the system. Come on. It doesn't want to click over. You get that. Okay, so we'll start off with the main component, and of course that is the compressor. The compressor that's driven off a fan belt. So if you are going to put it onto a vehicle, you have to make room for another belt to go onto the crankshaft, or you might want to run it off something else, but the crankshaft would be the better place, and that's where I've done it on the S-Series Valiant. We say the compressor, and the word compressor means it's going to compress something. Can we compress water?
A little bit.
But usually it's not a good thing. So that's all that part really does. It compresses. It can't compress a liquid, otherwise it's going to put its leg out the side. And of course, when we compress it, what is going to happen to it? So we've got the bike pump. We put our finger over the end. We push our...
It's going to get nice and hot.
It's going to get hot. And that's what we want to do with the compressor, with the refrigerant. But remember, it can't be a liquid. But when we put it in the system, it is a liquid. So the next component we go to is number 2, and that is our condenser. And that is stuck out the front of the vehicle next to the radiator, but we don't want to mount it too closely to the radiator, because what's going to happen from the radiator?
The little donkey's going to get hot.
Heat transfer.
Heat transfer, exactly. So we have it out in front of the car. There's a distance between the condenser and the radiator to make sure we're going to use this as a cooling component to cool the hot refrigerant, which is not a liquid at this stage. It is a hot gas. Put it through the condenser. You can see it's mighty hot at this stage. And then, of course, what happens is, as it goes through, and this is a series type condenser because it's got one in and one out. And of course, we want the refrigerant to start being a liquid by the end here. Of course, if we don't get enough air, that's not going to happen. So really fitting an air conditioning system, what you want to see is a fan, an electric fan on the front of it. So when it gets too hot, it can cool it down. Now, the electric fan is run off, just not straight power. You don't want to be running it all the time. So it has to be on a temperature switch, and the temperature switch, when it senses that the refrigerant isn't cooling down from the temperature sensor on it, it's going to turn on the fan and it's going to start cooling it down. Because remember, we want it to be a liquid. Our next component is our receiver dryer. Now, our receiver dryer is the part where, when it leaves there, it must be a liquid. It must be a liquid. How are we going to mount it? Where's the best place to mount this? not next to the exhaust manifold like a lot of people do. It has to be mounted. In some vehicles, on the inner guard, they cut a hole in it and they stick the bottom part of it through the guard. So the air off the road and the wheel turning around is going to cool it. Ideal spot. But on my S-Series Valiant, I didn't want to cut a hole like that. So I put the receiver dryer out the front of it, the vehicle. I found that was the best place I could put it. This little device does a number of other things. It has a couple of sensors on it. So, of course, if the refrigerant is too hot, it's going to turn the fan on at the front. If it builds up too much pressure and the fan can't cool it down, if we keep on pumping, what's going to happen to the air conditioning line?
Bang.
It's going to go bang. And you might have seen in days where we had R12 and in the 60s, there was no switch like that in the system. And of course, what would happen if we got a blockage in the system somewhere, it'd build up so much pressure and then blow off the line. Of course, if there's no refrigerant in the system, how do we lubricate the system? How do we lubricate this pump up here? With oil. You must have oil. The real old compressors did have a sump, but the new type compressors are rotary and they don't have a sump. So the refrigerant has to take the lubricating oil around the system to lubricate just that. Nothing else has to be lubricated. Maybe a little bit on this device up here, which we're going to talk about soon, but we don't really lubricate anything else. Because really speaking, guys, in here, we do not want any moisture. If there's moisture in there, it's going to rust everything and the system ain't going to work properly. But we'll talk about that more soon. So, receiver dryer also is a storage for the refrigerant. So the lower section here where the pickup is, it's all going to be a fluid. And of course, that's where we take the pickup, and that's where, of course, we take it to the next component. But also in there, because we've got a compressor, and that's got a mechanical piston happening in there, and if any little pieces come off the piston or the rings or whatever, we want to protect the rest of the system, and especially this component up here. So there is a filter inside. Next component up the top there, number 4, is the TX valve. And the TX valve is where we have liquid here and we put it through a little pinhole. And that little pinhole is controlled by the thermostat. Just going to the compressor, what happens on the intake of the compressor? What sort of sense are we going to have there?
Oh, the ice.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not, but
But what are we taking there? Are we taking in refrigerant that is actually a liquid? We said before we didn't want that.
yes, yeah.
What do we get on the intake manifold of a car?
Icing on its own.
No. Any other ideas?
Vacuum.
Ah, vacuum. Yes, the word vacuum. We have a suction here, guys. And of course, the suction is going to be playing in this whole area here, trying to drag the refrigerant through that little pinhole. And of course, we have a high pressure, hot refrigerant that's in a liquid form. We take it from a high pressure into a low pressure. And what happens to our refrigerant?
Drop the temperature.
Drops the temperature. It can be It's still in a liquid form, but it's in a different type of liquid form. It's in an atomized state. So just like your carburetor, the fuel goes in and mixes with the air. This is in an atomized state and goes into our next part, which is the evaporator. Now, the evaporator, what causes it to get cold in the car? Any ideas?
There's a fan in there to push the cold air out. And it's the expansion of the gas, changing, absorbing heat.
Ah, he just said the magic word, absorbing heat. So it's not the fan blowing through, it's the hot air being blown through there. When it comes out the other side, we've absorbed all the heat out of it. So then that is how we get cold. It's not blowing cold air from the other side, it's blowing hot air. And then when it gets through, it absorbs the heat out of that air, and then it gets pushed off into the car. And of course, the best idea for your car is not to have the outside air coming in, because it has to work really hard. It's to have it on recycle, and you're using the air inside the car to cool it down. And of course, when it does, it's come in as a liquid into a low pressure. It gets very cold. It goes through the system, and all that absorption of the heat then causes our atomized liquid to go to a gas. And that's why at the other end here, we are bringing in a gas into the system. So any questions there? There's a lot more involved in it, but I've tried to put it over as basic as possible. Are you understanding possibly?
Why are you asking me?
Well,
Yes, I am.
got an idea how it works? Good, good. So then when you've got questions at work about an air conditioning system, you'll know straight away.
I'm going to sit here and tell you I already knew.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Sorry.
Separation between the condenser and the radiator.
You at least need about 10 mil.
Is that all? Oh.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to have it touching, but if you've got a distance, air can get around and help the process. Yeah. But after a lot of accidents in cars, what happens when the condenser gets put back in? It's not put in the right spot. And then we have a big problem. Okay, so that's just showing where the high pressure is. Of course, the orange is the very high pressure, as we've told you. Then we've got the liquid stage in the red. Then we've got the suction blue here. And then we've got where it absorbs the heat. And then we're back to the compressor. So it's quite an easy circuit once you've got an idea how it works. So again, in this picture, it's just showing the high side. Because when we work on the air conditioning system and we hook up gauges to see what's happening, we put one to the high side, which is usually represented in a red colour, but not on all of our cars of today. It's usually the smaller fitting. Then the suction side shown in the blue. And then a typical air conditioning system with the fan involved. Then, so we've got our compressor. We've got our gas that's been compressed. It then goes to the condenser, gets cooled down, turns into a liquid. We only draw liquid from this part because this is in the bottom part of the receiver dryer. Then it goes through to the TX valve, where it goes through a very small orifice, which is controlled by a thermostat. And then, of course, it comes through, the heat's absorbed from in the car, it goes back as a gas and gets compressed again. So typical compressor, wobble plate inside, pistons going up and down, got an intake, it's got an exhaust. Fairly basic system. Belt systems, some are run by multiple belts, some are run by one belt. The clutch setup, which is on the front of the compressor, which with your temperature sensor and your sensor in the evaporator inside the car controls when the clutch goes on and when it goes off. So it usually builds up a pressure, and if it needs more refrigerant to be cooling down the system, the clutch keeps on running. But when the temperature inside the car gets to a certain temperature, it then takes the clutch off. Because what happens then is, if we keep on cooling the air inside the car, what happens when it gets too cold?
On the heat exchange anymore.
Well, it might.
Freeze.
It's going to freeze. We could have snowflakes coming out the car, and this is telling us that our system isn't set up correctly. So different types of condensers. This condenser here is in a series state, one start, one finish. Then we have the parallel type, which is the more effective type condenser. So when you're buying parts to build your air conditioning system, you're better to have a parallel system than a series, more effective. There's our auxiliary fan at the front of the vehicle, helping the condenser to cool down. Typical wiring of the condenser, operated off relays, of course. So inside our receiver dryer, this is what's inside. As I told you before, there is a filter system. And then we have another substance in here, which is called desiccant. And when you buy something, you have those little satchels, and they're to absorb moisture. Of course, in our air conditioning system, if we have moisture in there, and it gets to our TX valve, and it freezes up just before where it comes out, we're going to have a blockage. But the normal refrigerant itself doesn't do that, only when it's got moisture in it. And of course, you can see in the bottom here where it picks up the liquid form.
Is that filter a service item or?
The whole unit is a service item. But the only time when you go to replace it is when the system has been opened. So you could have an air conditioning system that's 20 years old, it's never lost any refrigerant. It's going to have the original one on. But with an air conditioning system, you need to run it. You at least need to run it once a month because it has this seal on the front of the compressor and it needs to be lubricated. And if it's not lubricated, it dries out, and then you have a problem like Tony's got. He wants to get an air conditioning system going again, probably hasn't been used for years, and the seal's kaput. Now he has to try and find a seal for it, which the system what he had originally would have been R12. I don't think you can buy R12 anymore, or somebody's got some stashed away somewhere, you're going to pay an arm and a leg for it.
I got a bottle though.
You got a bottle at home.
Bring it over.
Take that one to yourself.
That's it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said anything. You're liable to be broken into now.
That's it. Where do you live?
It's as heavy as milk. It's only a small bottle. You try to pick it up.
It's nearly all high chill these days.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the TX valve. So as you know, the refrigerant comes to this point here. It goes in as a liquid form. This is the little ball valve inside, and this is where the actual refrigerant comes out at an atomized state. It then comes out this way, goes through the evaporator, and then it actually absorbs the heat out of the car. Then it comes back in, and this is where the temperature sensor is. So it's not getting cold enough. It's going to allow more in. If it's getting way, way too cold, it's going to close it off. And it just works like a thermostat up and down. Won't worry about that one. That's another picture of it. Won't worry about that one. Won't worry about that one. Hoses. Tony was talking about before, he wants to retrofit his R12 system to 134A. Remembering that 134A now is a refrigerant that's on its way out because we have a new refrigerant now, but there is problems with that refrigerant putting it into older cars because the new refrigerant is explosive.
That's nice.
And the better cars out on the road will have a extinguisher system built into the vehicle in case the refrigerant gets a leak. But we will talk about that. But that refrigerant, guys, is in a situation where it doesn't harm the ozone layer. 134A is more friendlier, but still depletes the ozone layer. But the greenies like this one, but what happens when the car catches fire and we start burning all the plastics and all that sort of stuff? Yeah, exactly. But anyway, going back to these hoses, the hoses for R12 didn't have this nylon insert in them because this rubber piping, like any rubber piping, brake hoses, water hoses, still allow refrigerant to get out. And it's like brake hoses on a car. The moisture gets absorbed in through the rubber hoses because there's all these little holes there. So that is the 134A hose with the nylon tubing inside it. But it's not a big thing to replace hoses. You buy a kit, you get some crimping pliers and what have you, and it doesn't take a lot of time to do that sort of thing. So the different fittings. So these were the fittings for 134A. The other ones for R12 were a screw-on type. These are a clip-on one, and then you turn the tap in, and of course it opens up the connection through. As I said, the R12. So you can see what refrigerant is in the vehicle. The vehicles should only have R12 and 134A in them, not propane. Tell me about propane, somebody. What does that do?
It's a better air conditioning unit than anything else, but it can burn.
It's explosive.
Yeah, that's right.
Big bang.
So when you have an accident and the hose gets cut and it goes on to the hot exhaust manifold, just remember all these people with barbecues and people getting burnt. And the ad with the caravan the other night, where there was a gas leak inside the car, inside the caravan, and they actually turned the oven on. It blew the windows out of the caravan and so forth. That's what you're going to create with putting propane in an air conditioning system when you have an accident. You might have been lucky enough and been killed, but you're going to be barbecued.
Anyway, yep, promoted.
Yeah. But people don't understand that. So this here is the device for filling the air conditioning system. So what we have to do when we've repaired a system or when the system's new, we have to take all the air out of it, because what does air have in it? Moisture. Very good. We've got a really good class here tonight. 25 minutes. Good. Another 5 minutes.
Smoke over, remember?
So we have to put a vacuum pump on the system. And John and me know all about vacuum pumps. Because if you don't tighten up the connections tight enough, you're not going to create a vacuum. And when we create a vacuum, we actually burn off or boil off all the moisture in the line. How does the refrigerant go in there? In the liquid form? Because of the vacuum. How else can we put it in there? On some of the R12 machines, they had a pump to pump it in, but you had to have the vacuum there because otherwise it still wouldn't go in. So we must have a vacuum. So this device, with our gauges, will pull the vacuum down to below zero, and we'll have a perfect situation where we can then put in the refrigerant. How do I know how much refrigerant to put in the system? Well, you must go back to the type of refrigerant. You have a graph, the temperature of the day, and this is what the pressures should be on the gauges when you put that refrigerant in. And it changes from temperature because that's how the relationship with the refrigerant is. So any questions there on filling the system? We need a vacuum, and the quantity what we put in is determined by the sticker on the vehicle. And if you don't have a sticker there, you need to read the gauges.
What about the sight glass on the
Sight class for 134A, forget about.
doesn't work?
Doesn't work, just has a clouded mess.
Yeah.
It has bubbles in it, and you think you need to put these gauges onto the system, and one side should be reading 10, let's for example say, and the high side should be running 100, a tenth. And that's where it should be when it's operating for a while. You get that nice 10th situation.
Notice it doesn't liquefy anymore, it's always bubbling, yeah.
Yeah, the ones where you and a lot of the new ones with the receiver dryers, you'll never see the sight glass anymore. It's usually blocked off. And it's a different type of receiver dryer from the two different gases. So we're nearly complete. So moving on to the Valiant. The first picture I've got here, and sorry I couldn't turn it around, but anyway, this is the mount that goes on the side of the slant 6 motor. So what I did was I bought this part of the bracket, had a couple of pieces of steel in the shed, and I mocked it up on an engine out of the car. Too hard to do in the car. Of course, I had to mount the compressor in here to get the fine adjustment, and I also had to put an extra pulley on the crankshaft, which I bought mine through Hemi Performance. It was an aluminium one, which bolted onto the back. Some people use a pulley off a slant 6 water pump and mount it up. But what I think the aluminium one's the best way to go. It's easy to put on and it's not a big drama.
Got one of those slant 6 at home.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, I got it from the States. Yeah.
So there's the bracket all ready to go to be bolted on. And there it is on the vehicle, mounted there. I've left the original oil filter on the vehicle and it's hidden in underneath there. Some people hang it right down the bottom here, but I didn't like the idea of it too close to the subframe there and I wanted a bit of clearance.
Yeah.
Some people put it right up the very top, which I want to keep the idea that it's still an old car. And if you really look, you'll find that, but it's not sort of hanging out there like on a V8. More pictures of the bracket. how close it was to the oil filter housing, but a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of a grind, and it's got the clearance there now. The front view, and on the front view, you can see the extra pulley, the aluminium pulley at the back there. And a lot of people that I've spoken to have problems checking the timing of their motor because their compressor's in the wrong place and it covers it over. Mine, you can still do the timing on the engine. So I took that into account also.
Where's the aluminium pulley behind the other one?
Yes, behind the other one. So not in front, no. Yeah, because you need to put it all behind the main fan belt because you haven't got much room out the front.
Plus, it's a heavy load on that belt, on the crankshaft. You need to get it closer to the bearing if you can.
Yes, exactly. So this is behind the grille of the car. You'll see that I've got a thermo fan there, which was part of the kit, which the kit that I chose, I wanted the thermo fan, and you know why I wanted it. You can see that the receiver dryer. Now what's wrong with this photo? Does anybody know what's wrong with this photo? This is actually the left-hand side of the car. This is the right-hand side of the car. When I was putting the photo in, I didn't realise, but it got mirrored the other way. So, of course, that's nicely put behind there. It fits there nicely. Put the right brackets on all your hoses and that. Works out really nice. And it's all hidden. Nobody can see it. Another picture of the thermo fan. The size of it, I'm only going to get one fan in there. That's how big it is. And the guy that I actually bought the air conditioning kit from had helped a lot of people with early Valiants putting their air conditioning on. So he said, this is the condenser that you need, where if you bought it from a mob and it doesn't say it's due for an S or an R series or whatever, you might get a condenser that's too big from that area. And I know the condenser what I've got, the air conditioning system works perfect.
Wouldn't it be just straight 225 all the range through?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it should. Just depends if the radiators get any bigger, but I don't think they ever did. They just had different brackets on them. So the battery carrier, I did have to modify just a little bit. Of course, on the front of the engine, now we've got a situation where we have something restricting the radiator. And of course, the first process what I did was to put more blades on the fan. So this is a fan blade that I got from America. You really need to buy it from America because you can pay $200 for one of these things. But I've seen them there for $30 US. You've only got your postage, and it ain't going to be $150 in postage. So remember that. Have a good search around for that sort of stuff and don't pay full price for things. So, of course, we put that fan onto it. But we have to look at a number of things when we're fitting a fan up to any early Valiant. Because the distance between the front of the motor and the radiator, there is nothing.
This much.
Yeah. And soon I've got a document there that will show you what the clearances should be on the fan. So this fan is very flat at the front. It's more curvature in the back where I can get away with that to the other components. And I am running a spacer, which it's not an inch spacer, it's a 7/8 spacer, which you can't buy a 7/8, so I just turned it down on the lathe. The radiator is a big problem. And that's why I've got this little board on the side here. We have our radiator. And this is looking at the front of the radiator. And that's how our radiator looks. What is the design fault on that radiator?
Not a cross flow. It's straight up and down.
Originally, that's how Valiant made their radiators. And of course, guys, the water inside the radiator goes from
Top to bottom.
top to bottom.
And hopefully gets cooled in the meanwhile.
And that's all the hot water. And the rest of the water, guys,
Sitting there.
does go through, but it's not in the right feed. And if you have a radiator, an original one, there should be a component in there. And it's a plate that runs the water across. But you know what? When you get a new radiator core,
Take them out.
you know what happens? What's this piece of shit?
Throw it away. That's
And
it.
throw it away.
That's the experts doing that.
Yeah, the
Not
experts.
backyarders, because they say it must be there because they put it there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the experts. They do it.
So I've been trying to fix up the problem with my cooling system. And I've gone to a lot of bits and pieces and what have you. And I believe that piece in my radiator was thrown out when, and before when I didn't have air conditioning. On a hot day, yes, it did get a little bit hot. But I never worried about it because I thought, oh, this is a real hot day.
Away with it.
Got away with it.
Yep.
To get a new core 5 years ago, it was $400.
Yeah.
$400 to get a core. I don't know what it's like now.
I paid $950 for mine.
$950.
Holy cow.
I just got one a month ago.
$950. Wait till I tell you something that I worked out today. In my busy day of thinking about other things plus doing other things. So really speaking, with the radiator, already the radiator in the car is a small little radiator. And I remember when I had an EK Holden and I put a 179 HP motor in and hotted it all up and that, I just got the angle grinder and cut the sides and put a bigger one in. But that's structure. So you really can't do that to your car. So what sort of material is this radiator made out of?
Sort of a brassy copper sort of brass.
How does that transfer heat well?
Reasonable.
Reasonable. What's something better?
Aluminium.
Oh, aluminium. I like this man. I like this man.
Easy.
He really knows his stuff.
Yeah.
What about the modern ones? They're plastic.
That
Plastic and aluminium.
aluminium in the.
That's just the tanks.
Yeah.
So what if I told you I could buy a radiator with the bottom one here,
Top one at the other end.
top one at the other end,
Aluminium.
aluminium,
And multi-cores.
3 cores,
Yeah. Not just the two, yeah.
and how much?
About less than $400 probably. Someone bought one just the other day. I was surprised how cheap it was. Yeah,
40, but that's okay.
that's it.
We're sort of into question time now. $235 and it's fully aluminium. It's made in Australia and it's got a lifetime warranty on it.
If you paint it black, it looks the
Find a
same.
radiator that went vertical.
Yeah,
I looked and they're all horizontal these days.
yeah,
They'll work better that way.
yeah. That's right. They'd work better with the crossflow.
Yeah.
So guys, that was my choice at the end
Yeah.
because it was aluminium. If I'd taken the radiator out of the car and took it to a place and had this put over, and the guy would have said, "Oh, it needed a new core." This figure here, $950, would probably turn into $1,500.
It wouldn't work much better because it's just vertical,
Yeah,
just a couple of vertical things, yeah.
So you don't want to know that I paid $650 for a recore and both tanks repaired.
yeah. Well, that's still dear. because you could have bought
But
one
it
of
looks
these.
factory.
And that brings us to another story. I'm glad you brought that up. The fuel of today. Does anybody know about the fuel of today compared to the fuel of yesteryear?
Lead.
It is no lead in it. It's something more important.
Well, that's not in it as well.
Oh,
Little bit, yeah.
Lower octane?
I think value
Run
might
harder.
the heat value, another smart person in our class. We've got a lot of smart people in our club. Yeah, yeah.
The word.
See, he was just asleep a couple of minutes ago and now he's woken up and it's all happening. So, our engine's going to run hotter with the fuels of today. And because it runs hotter, we have to go away from yesteryear on our original cars and modify them to withstand the fuel that we're putting in today. I'm a complete enthusiast about originality, but I still want to drive the car on the road. If I was doing up a car to put in a museum, different story. But every time you stop, like on most older Valiants, and you leave it there for 10 minutes and go back to the car and try and start it, all the fuel has evaporated out of the fuel line. Now, talking to some really old technician, which I learnt a lot from him, he said they had that problem when the cars were brand new.
Yes, that's fine. Factory option.
But it's not a good thing sitting there, crank, and it's like it's flooded. Because the fuel that comes up is going to evaporate for a while too, because it's so stinking hot, the line. So you need to bring the line away from the engine, put it up out into the breeze, which I've got a picture of this, so it doesn't get hot anymore, or maybe change the type of material. But the other problem is, why did the car get so hot in the first place?
Radiator's blocked.
No, the radiator was no good for the car anyway.
First place.
And that's why it gets hot and won't start.
The answer to the fuel problem, evaporation, there's still fuel in the car, but you should still run. It's obviously all evaporating and flooding the engine.
Yes.
Right. The other thing is, put a little T-piece somewhere near the carburetor and run it like something the size of a brake line and run it back to the tank.
Yes.
But that means someone has to know what they're doing there, because you've got to mount the receptacle properly.
Yeah, I've done that on my 37 Dodge. I've got a return line back to the tank, and all it's done to me is cause problems of fuel leaks. I put it all nicely there, but I mightn't use the car for 2 years, and then when I go to use it the next time, I've got a fuel leak there. Oh, yeah, maybe the mice are getting to it. But the fuel filter, you can get fuel filters with a return line.
Yeah, CM's had one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why they had it, because they were trying to fix up a problem.
Yeah.
So, guys, you can see that I've put a fan shroud there, which is very helpful. The fan blades just need to be sticking out of there, the back of them, to work efficiently. And it has the instructions on a lot of the fan boxes.
You're saying that the original radiator, what about the later model Valiants? Are they the same?
I don't know. I haven't investigated those.
With the outlet, one at the top and one at the bottom.
Together. Unless it's had a new core put in, it might be still all right. I'm trying to find an old radiator so I can take the tank off it and show people the plate that's supposed to be in there. But the problem is to get one.
Solve the problem there.
Yeah, it would solve the problem here. Yeah.
So who makes the aluminium one at 235?
That was on eBay.
Oh,
Aussie radiators or something, mate.
Yeah, you just go in S-Series Valiant, and that's what came up. And there was hundreds of other ones there, but I took the one that was made in Australia and had the lifetime warranty, because I reckon for that sort of dollars for that price, lifetime warranty. Yeah.
is that Aussie Desert Cooler doing all radiators?
Yeah, they could do something. Yeah, there is a PWR, and they're $1,300.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, $1,300. Same thing. But Australian made, just support the people in Australia. I don't know where the core came from, by the way, but it says it's Australian made.
For that price, you can change it
Where'd you get
in the next 20 years.
The shroud, I got that from eBay. Just typed in shroud and they came up with all these different ones. I have cut it down, of course. You have to cut it down to make sure your fan blades are just sticking out nicely. And the other thing that I've put on there,
Nicely.
the fan blade is just proud, just coming this side. Yeah.
Not inside the shroud.
Yeah, just the back of it just showing out. Yeah. The other thing what I've done is the overflow tank, which when a car gets hot and gets really hot, it's going to build up so much pressure, and we've got a pressure relief valve in our radiator. We want a pressurized system because we can raise the boiling point of the vehicle, so it must work correctly. But when it gets really hot, it will open it up and it will push it out. But then your radiator's down a little bit. Now, in the center part of the radiator cap is a little valve. And that valve there is when it cools down, the actual valve opens up. And if you've got an expansion tank like this, it will draw back the coolant that you've pushed out when it's really got hot. Yeah. Really good idea. But that one there, I'm probably going to change because you can get one from, that's a cylinder type one, and you could mount it down the side of the radiator out of the way where it doesn't look as bulky as that.
With the shroud, a mate of mine gave me, I had a Tirana one. It was a big plastic one.
Yeah.
Tirana, and I cut it down and made it fit in. And plus I put on, because I could put a Hemi 265 in the wagon. Usually it gets pretty hot sometimes. They never.
Yeah, not all the time, but yeah.
And in the end, and then I went to the wreckers and I got a Falcon 7-blade flex fan. It's not a clutch fan.
Just a flex.
It's got the flexi blade on it. 7 blades, and that is
works very nice.
Works very well with the
but there's one problem. You've disgraced us all putting GM parts on your car and Ford parts. You'll be whipped after this session.
If it works, I'll put her on.
So this is a flex fan also, but it's steel and stainless. And there's a picture of how the fan blade should be sticking out of there. And of course, that's the different spaces that you can get, but I had to turn the one down. There's so water pumps, very interesting. And we're going to be finished in a couple of minutes anyway. But water pumps, this is a modified water pump. Rachel would never have seen one of these because usually they've got this impeller thing there and this plate's not there. The old guy that I learned a lot of information off, he says this component across there and the fan blade must be 3.5 inches long minimum. The one what you get on there is just over 3 inches. So already you have got a problem with that water pump not working right.
Where's the 3.5 inches? I didn't quite understand it. The diameter.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Must be 3.5. That's for a slant 6 motor.
Yeah.
Originally, it had a cast iron one there that was 3.5 and had a backing plate on it. And of course, at low speed, you want to get as much water moving as possible. And that stopped that from doing that. With that, yes. The other thing what you can do is play with pulleys, put a smaller one and make it run a little bit faster. Now, on my 36 Dodge, I always wondered why it had a smaller pulley on it. Speeds them up.
Yeah, use a lot of horsepower and fuel too.
Yeah, but long as it's cool.
Cool, that's it, yeah. That's cool. Yeah. And if it goes fast enough, you don't need the rear wheels. It'll just, the pop will put it along, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing is I took some time to find this radiator to fan clearance for an S-Series Valiant. has to be in between 3/4 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch, half to 1. So that is the tolerance and that is the spec there. So for an S-Series, it's different for the 2 model cars. I don't know what they are, but I believe the radiator in an R-Series is slightly different. It doesn't have the situation of this right here. It has the situation of that being there. And they run a different radiator hose.
And VC onwards was opposites.
Yeah, opposites. Yeah, bad idea. So the S-Series Valiant, in between half to 1 1/4, that includes, I'm running 3/4 of an inch right in the middle of it.
The other thing, you plate under that impeller tries to prevent cavitation.
Oh, definitely.
And that's your efficiency is coming from there more than the diameter, I'd say.
Yes, yeah. Must have the plate on there and yep. So that's the air conditioning inside the car. It looks neat and tidy. I have since made a part inside the panel there that I take air from the box and I use it as a demister, because on this model air conditioning, they didn't have demisters, which now you can buy a system with a demister in, but it doesn't look like that.
What brand is that?
Oh, I bought it from a guy from Queensland. I'd have to find the make of it,
No,
but you see them on eBay everywhere.
no.
Now, what I did was to get the demister, you can see the little panel that I've put up in there to get it to demist right. And of course, when the demister's on, it's not warm. You're virtually throwing the air conditioning, and on a cold day, the wife was having problems with her knees, chattering. So I bought these little inserts where I put into the vents there, and of course you can close that off. And it works quite good in normal rainy weather. But when you're in a downpour where you can only see this far in front, demister don't work no more because there's so much moisture in the air. But that's where I'm going to put in a rear defogger that blows air from behind you back onto the screen. Another picture of it there. I've talked about the defogger. So that's the kit virtually that I bought. It was a little bit more dearer than that, but that had all the hoses and everything with it, except for the pulley and the bracket for mounting it on. This is the one that is for R&S and for the different Valiants up to VC. And this does have a demister incorporated in that system, which it's not a bad price, but I haven't bought one yet. I'm busy buying other things at the moment.
In the bad old days, they had those York parallel twin compressors.
Yep.
And uses to mount it. This looks a lot easier.
Yep.
And more efficient.
Yes, that's right. And of course, what I've done in my car, I'm not using the original switches. I've made up a press button. And those press buttons are just hooked up to, yeah, that's right. It's just hooked up to normal buttons behind it. So,
Good.
question time. Any questions?
When are we going to get summer that you might need an air conditioner? Because at the moment it's 11 months of winter and maybe 1 month of summer. Like.
Well, I went for a trip to Tasmania and I used it there because it got quite warm there. Maybe we're in the wrong state. We should go
Either south or north.
Yeah. I don't know what it's like there now. It's probably colder.
Yeah.
But even for demisting the car, it really helps.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. We used to open a little vent window and put the fan on to cold, you know.
Yeah.
It helped, yeah.
Yeah. But the older cars were always a problem with fogging up.
Yeah.
And when you're driving on really wet conditions and what have you, yeah, and that's where I got the idea of the Trafalgar, because I saw people in front of me on rallies pouring down with rain, no fog in their car. And at the next stop, I'd go and go, why isn't your car fogging up? Top secret.
Yeah. Air conditioning.
What's this little vent along the back of the window?
Yeah.
But eBay's a lovely thing. We didn't have,
The adventure I got came with a rear heater, fan device, you know, so you can run the fan is in the boot.
yes, well, that's a
And you can
defogger.
blow all the air
Yeah,
out.
that's a defogger, rear defogger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah. So,
Yeah. They range on eBay. Anything, one that I bought was 35 US. The mail was probably $100 because there's quite a bit of big package to send it. I got another one for 45 US, but I have seen them there for 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 and 800 US.
They come with vents and hoses.
Yeah. Yeah, but don't look, it's under defoggers. And Chrysler had them, Ford had them, and GM had them. And Pontiacs had definitely got them in that one that Frank's got on his farm. He didn't know anything about them, but I'm going to see if that's got a defogger in it too. Maybe we can buy that one.
well, why buy it? Just steal it.
Well, he is a friend and a colleague. You know?
Oh, you're all right, okay.
Yeah.
Let him go.
So your car out there, we can go to it and
No.
take a few parts off.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah, that's different.
That's different.
Yeah. No, I don't mind spending the money, you know. He has to feed the grandkids. Yeah. Any other questions?
This heater, the radiator with the both on the same side, when you get one put on that side, you have to get a different type of hose, or was it the original hose?
No, you have to put a longer hose on it.
Longer hose.
Yeah. So I'll have to source that, get a couple of spares.
No place called Barton.
Yeah, well, maybe they've got a big bin full of rubber hoses. Do you have that sort of thing?
We do actually. We get it all the time. People come in with a sample hose or a picture.
Yeah.
But they've literally held a bit of cardboard over the top of where they want it to go, and they draw it,
Oh, that's what I'll do.
and then
Thanks
they
for
tell
that.
us what measurements on either side.
Good, excellent.
And so
I'll
we
come
go
and
out
see
the
you.
back to the pile of hoses and just go.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
2 minutes. That's what you want to do it. It's the quickest way to do it.
Yeah. And then we look. Yeah, we need to know the diameter because otherwise you're screwed. And then we tell you what that hose originally suits, so you record that.
And then you can go and buy it on eBay a third of the price.
If you like. Yep. Everything's cheaper on eBay. It's not-
No, the RS Club, they have hoses and that, but they're a lot cheaper than eBay. But you have to remember to buy them.
Yeah.
Have we got any questions from you guys at home?
You hear us about
No, he's shaking his head. No, all good.
you want sauce?
Another question?
Good night.
Awesome. Didn't talk. Okay, no worries. Thanks for coming along, guys, in the cold. Much appreciated. It does take quite a bit of time to put all that together.
Yeah.
That's why we've only do a certain amount a year, because you have to have the time to do it. Yeah. Thank you.
Good on you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us online. Appreciate it. Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
What up, Bruce?
No worries.
Good one.